Great to be with you this morning. Got a question for you immediately. Have you ever heard of the phrase overachieving? You ever heard that word, I guess? Oh, you're overachieving. They are overachieving. Really, it is often used almost like a backhanded compliment. Kind of like, wow, how did you get that result? You of all people did that? Like you were really overachieving. And this is fresh on my mind this week. As a certain sports commentator said of a football team playing in the upcoming Super Bowl, he said they have overachieved and it's going to get the best of them on Super Bowl Sunday. That's a yeah, right? But that's a backhanded compliment. You know, saying like, "Oh wow, we don't know how you did it, but you did it." It's going to catch up to you though. But maybe this guy's right. Because the team he's referencing, they hadn't won a playoff game in 30 years. That team had a record of 6-25. 6 wins and 25 losses over the last 2 years. The defense, bad. Offensive line, terrible. The commentator may have a valid point, right? But there's this little thing called belief. And when people come together, regardless if it's a football team or a family or a church, and if they believe in something, anything is possible. Yeah, that football team doesn't look like much on paper, but belief changes things. Belief changes us. Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow, he put it this way. He said, "We aren't underdogs. This is us." Listen, I am no Bengals fan, but that is something I can get behind. How about you? That is something I can believe in. How could you today place that sort of declaration into your life? I'm not an underdog. This is us. Yeah, it's just me and my small paycheck, but God could do great things through a generous heart. I may be young, but I've lived a lot of life. And I have a long way to go, but God is moving in me right now. Not to do something big later, but to do something big right now. What about you? What about you, church? Where in your life, in your faith, could you have the audacity to overachieve? For people to look at you and say, "How did you do that?" Because as Christians, we obviously don't make this all about us. We make it about someone else entirely. So I want to use this often meant as a negative word, overachieve, because people will always doubt you. They will always question your gifting. They will always question your ability. They will question your calling. And the worst part of that is that they may have good reason for it. They may point to something in your life and say, "Look, yeah, see, this is why." You may have really messed up in your past, and they can point to it, and maybe they're making valid points like this commentator was about this poor team. Maybe there's something to it. You know, you can't keep going. I know the real you. You will flame out because you always do. You can't keep your life on track long enough. You will fail. You will look foolish. Anyone else, or is it just me? Maybe you don't have actual haters, but maybe it's an internal monologue that tells you that. Or as Christians, we believe we have a very real enemy too. And maybe that's the voice that is also speaking to us. So see, we got all these doubts. Or is it just me? Right? We have all these doubts. And you may have a history you're not proud of. You may have had huge mistakes that still follow you around right now. But church, I'm telling you right now, belief changes everything. And in my notes, I did write, we may be a church of 50 people on a good day. What's that say about us today? I don't know. But we're not underdogs. This is us. We're not underdogs. This is us. We may have a building with lots of problems, lots of leaks, eating up a lot of our budget, but we're not underdogs. This is us. Because this is all about Jesus. And so I am determined to overachieve in our city, because when you do it, it is really humbling. It would be really humbling when people say, "Come to you," and they say, "How did you do it?" You can say, "Yeah, I don't know either, but that's what God did. I don't know how I was able to overcome this addiction with pornography. I don't know how I was able to overcome my alcoholism. I don't know how I was able to overcome these things in my life that have always kept me back. I don't know how I was able to overcome these things. But can I tell you about God who did this through me? Let's overachieve together, because it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not really even about us. But it's about Jesus. And it's all about God. So no, you can declare over your life, I'm not an underdog. We are not underdogs. This is us. So I'm going to tell you about one of the most popular overachievers in the Bible. His name is Abraham. And so if you want to flip ahead to Genesis 12, I'll get there in a moment. Genesis 12 is where we encounter him. But we know him as Abraham. And this man, he had a great calling on his life. And listen, church, get this. Because of Abraham's grit, his determination, his drive to succeed, his commitment to see great things happen, he nearly threw it all away. Out of his own effort, he almost screwed the whole thing up. Oh, and so listen, I love a good self-help book or TED Talk. I really do. But one of the foundational principles of Christian faith is that your life is not about you or you being the star of your story, but believing that someone else entirely is. And so we will get into more of that a little bit later. But for now, in Genesis 12, we're going to hop around this story a little bit, and we'll have the verses up for you as well. But let's meet this man formerly known as Abram. Okay, verse 1, chapter 12. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Now, if you are like me, and you read that, and you think to yourself, man, this young guy had his whole life ahead of him, and he got this awesome calling from God. Like, if I could go back, I would do something awesome too. Don't lose sight. Abram is about 75 years old when God came to him with this. 75 years old. And God has the audacity to say, not only do you not have children right now, not only are you struggling right now, not only do you not even really believe in me in any quantifiable way right now, I want to make a great nation out of you, Abram. You don't have kids, but we're going to go places. And so that's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. That all God gave him, though, was a promise. But notice, God didn't tell him the journey. He just said, hey, here's the promise. Attach yourself to it. Here's the calling. Here's the purpose. Whatever you want to call it. Here's the promise. But God didn't tell him what the journey would be, right? So for a lot of us, we know we have a calling. We know we have purpose. But man, this journey gets the best of us sometimes, right? The journey is what takes great faith. Hebrews 11:8, reflecting back, says, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. You ever feel like that? Seriously? Like, do you ever feel like that in your life? God, I'm in Louisville now, but I got gosh, I was given the promise, or I was told the purpose, but I'm at a loss. I didn't see COVID-19 happening. I didn't see instability happen. I didn't see this stuff happening. Oh my gosh, I didn't see the journey happening. Well, of course, because you wouldn't have said yes. Could you imagine, right? Could you imagine what you would say to God if he told you every step of your journey? You'd turn it down pretty quick, I think. But God tells Abraham, here's the promise. And so in case you don't know, Abraham, in our faith, he's known as one of the fathers of the faith, the father of our faith. Because Abraham, he set the course of his life by faith. He set an example for us to follow. God asked Abraham to go on this journey with him, a journey that would lead him to his destiny, promising Abraham he would be, this great nation. He'd make his name great, and he'd bless all sorts of people through this. But Abraham, did not get to know where he was going, what he would experience, how he would get there, how long it would take, or what his life would be like when he arrived. Having nothing but the promise of God. Abraham, he stepped out in faith. So, have you ever done something like that? Where people said, I don't know if you should be doing that. It can be faith related or not. Just something that you felt you needed to do, you needed to accomplish, and people came at you for it. Maybe even they said, listen, I love you, brother, but can I encourage you with something? Listen, if a Christian ever says, can I encourage you with something? Just say no, because it ain't encouraging. Okay, just say, email me. Don't do that to me. Can I encourage you with something? You're reckless. But have you ever done anything like that? Done something crazy, or what some would say reckless? At the time, a great friend of mine, which sets up a good story. At the time, a great friend of mine who meant very well, and I really do believe this. He told me it was foolish to move to Louisville and plant a church. I remember he said, they're a seminary city, tons of churches in Louisville. You have this other option over here in Los Angeles. You need to pursue that one because, God knows, Los Angeles needs all the love right now, right? And honestly, church, part of me, of course, was chomping at the bit with L.A. We nearly did go to L.A. We went out there and we interviewed. But as it turned out, that was not the promise for our family. That was not where we were to go. Kind of like Abraham here. We had a life already in motion, and we were comfortable. Life was great. We were in ministry. Things were going really well. But God had a way of turning all that on its head really fast. And in doing so, we were kind of called foolish. But we couldn't shake it, honestly. And it was, Kels, what was it, November, December or so. So, yeah. And at the time, we were in Michigan. And if you know Michigan in that time of the year, LA is pretty attractive, certainly right now, even here in Kentucky. LA feels nice, but again, it wasn't the promise. And it was really the hardest no of our lives because there was something there. And it was almost as if we could just step into it and it'd be fine, but we knew it wasn't for us. So what was it? As crazy as it sounds, the promise, it wasn't this big, extravagant, light from heaven sort of moment. It was simply go to Louisville, and I still can't even say the city right. Go to Louisville, go to Louisville, invite folks to join you, and work hard. And so, we're like, yeah, let's do it. And this is at the end of 2019, early 2020. Oh, we were so young. These 2 years aged us about 20. But listen, we could not have conceived this. We had no idea what to expect. But God has been faithful. Faithful through financial insecurity, faithful through uncertainty, faithful through a pandemic. Yes, it would have been nice to know more about this journey. We could have calculated so much more, but it really would have done a disservice to our faith. Because that's not what God gave us. He gave us the promise, and it's up to us to remain faithful to the promise. Like Abraham here, he wasn't given the details, but he was promised something inconceivable. And so that's just my first point, and I'm going to move through these really quick. I know every pastor says it, but I mean it. The first one is simply live by faith, not control. It almost sounds like a sermon I heard a week ago. Y'all remember that? It talked a little about control for a bit. And I think it's honestly, it's needed, especially for me, because this is about living with faith. What does that mean? Living with uncertainty and trust. That's what it is. No, listen, I'm not going to have all the answers to your questions that you have, maybe about the Bible, about faith, about culture, about whatever. I am not going to have all those answers, and I'm comfortable with that. I'm fine with that because I know I'm not in control, and I don't want to give you all the answers. But I do have a pretty big answer. I do have something I could give you. His name's Jesus, and I would love to talk about that because I can't answer everything in the world. I don't have the perfect Christian response to every social issue or whatever, okay? That everyone wants to act like, we have the answer. But I can point you to Jesus. I can say, I don't have that. But can I point you to someone who won't leave you? Could I point you to someone who won't forsake you? Could I point you to someone who won't forget you? But listen, I'm being really honest. Living by faith is just hard. It's just hard. Here is what faith is. Faith is the certainty of something we don't have yet. That sounds fantastic. Who would honestly live their life for that, right? The certainty of something we don't have yet. And so by definition, this really assaults my logic. I don't like that, Instead of charting my course by faith, I would rather use my human experience. I'd rather use my wisdom. I'd rather use my effort to control my life in order to protect myself from failure and discomfort and looking stupid, if I'm being honest. I spend a lot, if I'm being really honest, I spend a lot of mental and emotional effort preparing for everything I could possibly experience. Do you do this, or is it just me? You go through those just random scenarios in your head constantly. Maybe you're in the shower. Maybe you're laying in bed. Maybe you're just quiet for a moment. And you begin to mentally prepare for a situation at work that has a 1% chance of actually happening. A conversation with someone that won't actually happen. This reminds me of when I last packed for a trip to Florida with my family. Does anyone else suffer from overpacking? Right? Like you think, you pack all of the shirts, right? The t-shirts, but you think to yourself, well, it's Florida. It's going to be 90 all week, but it could rain. How do I fit my rain jacket in there, And for some reason, it's in my head, I'm going to have, I don't know why, I'm going to have some accidents. I need to pack lots and lots of undergarments, which, I haven't done that in 8 months, so I don't know why I think that. Right? Like this is what we do. This is what I do when I pack for a big trip. I just over prepare. And so I think about that when I think about faith as well. I think about that when I think of other things as well. So how are we to live? Right? Through manipulation and control, or simply by faith? Faith will make you do, honestly, some dumb stuff sometimes to the outside world. Faith will make you do things that people will call you foolish and crazy and reckless over. But how are we to live? By faith. For Abraham, it began as faith, but he begins to question and doubt, eventually. And he begins to make some mistakes. For example, his wife, Sarai, later named Sarah, she was unable to conceive a baby, even though they had been promised a son and a nation. They chose to take matters into their own hands. And Sarah convinced Abraham to sleep with her servant Hagar, and Hagar then was pregnant by Abraham. And so even if you are unfamiliar with that story, you can guess that the absolute drama that it caused. And everything begins to spiral. Eventually, God gives Abraham and Sarah a son. He does. He fulfills it later. He really does. And they name him Isaac. And the beginning of that promise begins to come to fruition. Looking into Hebrews 11 again, it says, by faith, that's Abraham, he went to live in a land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. Verse 10, for he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. And I just want to take a moment to quote Ralph Waldo Emerson. He at least popularized the quote, even if he didn't say it. He said, life is a journey, not a destination. Right? Like life is a journey, not a destination. And it illustrates an important part of Abraham's life. I think this also illustrates an important aspect of your life and my life. Because Abraham, he journeyed many years on his way to this inheritance, although God was capable of fulfilling his destiny at any location. And I'm sure Abraham felt that. I'm sure for Abraham, he is suffering at different points. And he's like, God, you promised this to me. Just get me there. God could have fulfilled it at any location, at any point in time. But God allowed Abraham to journey. God allows you to journey. Why? Because it was during the journey that Abraham, he forged his relationship with God, guaranteeing that Abraham would have the heart, the character, and spirituality to appreciate and hold on to this inheritance. And so the second point is simply the journey matters more than you think. And I know, I guess the human experience is that we always look for objective points that we're working toward, or we look back at a point, a definitive moment in time, and we think that's when it really mattered. That destination mattered most. But we forget who we became on the journey. We forget what God shows us and teaches us in the journey. Just this week, my kids and I, we have one too many streaming services like the rest of you, and we were on Disney Plus, and we were watching The World According to Jeff Goldblum. And listen, I love Jeff Goldblum. I'm a huge fan, and I want to be him when I grow up. I absolutely do. And my wife says, "You're not weird enough." And I said, "Don't worry, I'll get there." I just, he's such a weirdo, and I love it. That's beside the point. We're watching The World According to Jeff Goldblum, and if you are unfamiliar, he just takes you on a journey through different things, okay? They had an episode on, magic. Why do people like magic? He had an episode on dogs. It's a very good episode, too. And why people love dogs. And so he just takes these different things in the world and just helps you journey through them. Fireworks was another good one. Well, this one, the most recent episode we watched, was about birthdays. The attitudes toward birthdays, how different cultures celebrate birthdays, the importance of birthdays, and so on. So what stuck out to me in the episode was that they took time to focus on the psychology of birthdays. And they kind of confronted Jeff because he didn't like birthdays. And it was kind of, I think, therapeutic for him because at 13, he had a traumatic experience and he hated birthdays, since then. But for him, they got to it and they said, why do people hate birthdays, or why do people love birthdays, especially when you're younger? And they concluded that it seems that time moves slower when you're younger. Because when you're younger, you experience so much between the birthdays. You're experiencing first-time events in your life, I know for my kids, they experience a rodeo for the first time, and other things, right? But when you're younger, you get all these first-time experiences that you won't forget. But as you get older, you're more seasoned. You don't really have first-time experiences anymore. And so the psychology of it is that once you get older, time flies by because your journey between the birthdays are not as impactful. You're not having these first-time experiences anymore, thus you remember less. So time flies as you get older. Are you with me? I didn't lose you, right? It's pretty simple. And so scientifically, this phenomenon occurs simply because we experience less in our journey. Less memorable things happen in the journey. And so by the end of this episode, I'm having a spiritual experience. It's Jeff Goldblum. I can't help it. But I'm more of an emotional mess than I care to admit right now, because I realize how true that sentiment is. That the most important aspect of growing older, of following God, of celebrating something as simple as a birthday itself is not about the destination. It's not about the culmination of what you worked toward, but it's the journey it took you to get there. You don't become the person you are today because you finally got your doctorate and the letters after your name. But it was the journey and the sweat and just everything you poured into that shaped you and changed you. You don't become a great parent when you have kids and boom, I'm so good at this immediately. It's the journey. And often that journey is full of sorrow and grief and joy and celebrations. And so as a youth pastor, I heard this all the time from my students. They would say, I can't wait until, just fill in the blank. I can't wait until. As if my students believed the destination would eventually change everything. But now, 10 years later, if you ask them what really shaped them, it wasn't getting into their dream school. It wasn't getting into the military or landing the great job, but it was who they were becoming in the process. And it is no different for you. I don't care if you are 8 years old or 98 years old. It's who you're becoming on the journey. We can't afford to allow our obsession with finishing or arriving or achieving to overshadow what God wants to show you in the journey right now. What if the answer to your question, to your purpose, what if it wasn't found on the other side of your next milestone, but right now in the fire? See, when we get consumed by the end goal, we're really obsessing over control. Gosh, I love control, y'all. And if I could just meet that next one, I'm there and I'm with it and I can't wait. But the journey is the avenue in which we discover and work out our differences with God. It's the time we become aware of the convictions we need to develop. It will expose any lack of trust that we have, and it will help us clarify any wrong views we would even have of God. These are important experiences for developing a healthy relationship with God. Our relationship with God keeps us going while we wait for God to reveal our purpose and to appreciate our destiny when God does reveal it. The journey matters more than you think. And so right now, what is God doing in your heart? What season are you in right now? What is God showing you in this time right now? Or maybe for you, it's our debt. It is such a struggle. It holds us back from being generous. But one day, we'll be generous. Listen, it is good to have vision. Don't get me wrong. It is good to have vision. It is great to have dreams. But when you are so obsessed with what's next, you're never fully present with what God is doing on your journey right here, right now. The journey, whatever your present reality is right now, today, February 6th, 2022, this is a great day to hear the voice of God and to listen what His desires are for you today, not later. And this is because, point number 3, this is because what God requires, He provides. What He requires, He provides. Oh God, I don't know how I can do this. Pray earnestly. Pray with faith. Ask for faith. Thessalonians says, if you lack wisdom, ask for it. So in Genesis 22, Abraham, he's asked to do the unthinkable. God asks him to sacrifice that son Isaac on an altar meant for a ram or a goat. And you can read it yourself. But Abraham, understanding the importance of obedience and listening to God in this journey, he follows through with this request. He builds the altar. He ties up Isaac. And as he's about to sacrifice him, God intervenes. Because what God requires, God provides. So what is God asking of you today in your season of life? Where do you find yourself today? Feeling lost, feeling deserted, feeling like you are in a lose-lose situation? What God requires, God provides. You, as you are right now, you are enough for God to use. And I mean that. You are enough, as you are, to be used by God. And I say that, I was really inspired just a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to put it in last week's sermon, but I was like, this doesn't make sense. But it did for today. I wanted to encourage you, and I forget who wrote it, but I came across it online. And the author, she wrote, it was something along the lines of, she said, you are enough. You are enough. Like the loaves and fishes that little boy brought Jesus were enough. Do you get what we're saying here, right? You are enough. You are enough. Now, you're not enough to feed 5,000 people, but you are enough to approach King Jesus and to say, use me, and watch Jesus multiply and multiply and multiply and multiply. like fishes and loaves. You're enough as you are, but it's not in your work and it's not in your ability to multiply, but it's all about Jesus and his love and mercy and compassion for others. God could do more with your life than you could ever dream, than you could ever achieve on your own. With your life, you could overachieve if you would simply trust God in the journey right now. That's it. That's what I want to give you today, is that for a Christian, being called an overachiever is like the ultimate setup to share Jesus with somebody, right? Yeah, I am super dysfunctional. Yeah, do you know who I was 2 years ago? I was so messed up. But can I tell you about like how Jesus changes everything and how I'm not perfect right now? And how I still screw up and I still mess up and I still yell or I still say things I shouldn't say or I still have wrong motives or I still fill in the blank. But gosh, God is forgiving and he loves me and he forgives me. And can I tell you about him? I want to overachieve. And I think what a fitting message for today of all days, you know, that we could overachieve because we're just completely sold out on what God wants to do through us. Will you overachieve with me today? Could we expect to see God move in our hearts today? I want to invite our worship team back up, and I just want to enter into a time where we just take this to heart. Okay, I know that was a lot. Okay, we covered a whole lot. Like, there's a lot happening, you know. But remember, this life is about living by faith, not control. So maybe where are you reaching for control in your life, where you need to relinquish? Or maybe you're like me. You know, you have the fist over the one area of your life. And you're like, all right, God, use it. Do it. But God loves you so much, he's not going to force your hand open. He's going to, okay, yeah, release it. Watch this. Maybe on Sunday we feel pretty good, so we release a couple of fingers. All right, God, use it. Use my life. Here I go. Do it. And God's like, you're still living for control. That's not faith. And then you get like Chris Merrifield to pray over you. And you're like, oh man, I'm almost there. Yes, God, use it. But we still haven't surrendered it, right? It's when we come to God with an open hand and we say, I don't want to be in control anymore. I can't control this anymore. By faith, I surrender this to you. Use it. Or maybe for you, maybe you're obsessed with the next goal, the next achievement, the next thing, the next life event. And we're not being fully present in the journey to hear the voice of God right now. Maybe we're anxious about that next promotion. Maybe we're really, or the opposite. You know, maybe we are anxious and we're just paralyzed by it. Or maybe we're just so eager to move on to the next. I think either is dangerous, certainly. Because what is God showing us today, right here, right now? Because listen, church, whatever is required of us, God will provide that. And maybe it looks different depending on the situation. But God provides.